Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. Joining us today is Ronan Horowitz, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Elbit Systems of America. Ronan, thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Vago. It's a pleasure to be with you here from my office in Fort Worth, Texas.
Thank you very much for joining us from our command center in Washington, D.C. And before we start, a quick shout out to all of our sponsors. Our global coverage is sponsored by Leonardo DRS. Northrop Grumman sponsors our weekly cyber report and broader cyber coverage. And Fincantieri Marinette Marine sponsors our naval coverage. And of course, Bell sponsors this podcast. I want to start with, obviously, COVID-19. That's the big challenge that every American and indeed people around the world are facing. I want to get in a minute to DoD's declaration of defense industrial decisions, including the declaration of the defense industry as critical infrastructure, the progress payments change, as well as equitable contract adjustment terms as both the government and industry try to work together at an extraordinary time to continue to deliver capability, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Talk to us a little bit about the COVID-19 impact on your operations, on your workforce, as you try to balance both health concerns, but also delivering the mission.
Well, Vago, this is something we haven't seen before. So it's really putting all of us in a very new situation. What we have done throughout our company, and we started this a couple, 3 weeks ago, we actually implemented remote telecommuting for anybody that can do that. And so we have, out of our 2,400 people workforce, every day we have a little bit over 1,000 people who are actually telecommuting, working remote. That, of course, put a lot of stress on our IT infrastructure. We've beefed it up. We do WebEx, we do Zoom, we do Cisco meetings and different things like that to enable that part of the business to continue operating. Of course, we have 5 key facilities where we do production, engineering, development, and sustainment, all the way in Texas, New Hampshire, Virginia, Alabama, and in Florida. And over there, production employees, sustainment people continue to come into the facilities, engineers that have to do some testing. And what we've done through the telecommuting is make sure that we protect those that have to go into the facilities by minimizing their exposure. We've done shift changes and shift restructuring to minimize presence in the facilities. We have, of course, increased sanitation very, very significantly. We've allowed people a lot of flexibility. And I got to tell you, our people are responding. They are working. They're committed. They're dedicated. At the same time, all of us are concerned about our families, are concerned about the future of the business. So there's a lot of stress. That's a very stressful time.
Let me ask you. You mentioned about how successful the working relationship is. And I should also point out to our audience that you guys are one of our longtime sponsors. So I should mention that as well. And we'll be sponsoring some more of our coverage coming up soon. Let me ask you about how you are working with the government, because there are some contractors who had a little bit of concerns about the critical infrastructure declaration. There were some folks who were still continuing to go to meetings, for example, even if the government was not at those meetings, because there was a little bit of concern whether the contractor could legitimately be dinged for missing a meeting. So the idea was, hey, whatever happens, let's stick to that schedule. What's your interaction been like with the customer as you guys work together to balance both mission execution as well as the health of your folks?
Vago, I got to tell you, with all of the services, what we have seen is a significant attempt to be flexible, to communicate, and to support. And I'll give you just a few examples. AUSA Global was canceled. We're supposed to be in Huntsville, and I got absolutely approached by a 2-star from the Army, managing one of the key commands, who was supposed to meet with me and took the time to connect. And we had a teleconference last Friday where we went through some key programs and deliveries to understand our needs. We were able to tell him and his staff some of the things we need from them, and it was a very collaborative effort. I was supposed to meet with the head of acquisition, Mr. Smith, at SOCOM in Tampa. That visit got canceled because you know that SOCOM actually is not accepting any visitors. And instead of it, we had a teleconference and we had an hour of conversation and discussion on current and future efforts, and it was actually very, very productive. I can tell you the most remarkable example. You know, we're in the midst of finishing the functional configuration audits and physical configuration audits for our advanced cockpit system that is going into the FNA 18 and F15. And last week we completed a virtual functional configuration audit where the U.S. Navy, Boeing, and Elbit America and Elbit Israel actually all participated in completing a very successful function configuration audit for a new low-profile heads-up display. And I would say this is the first in the world. Very collaborative, very successful. So we've seen a lot of flexibility. I would also highlight the efforts Dr. Roper and the Air Force are doing to collaborate and to inform the industrial base. They've been communicating on a regular basis. Earlier this week, I participated in a Zoom meeting that was headed by Dr. Roper, a few people from the industries and others to talk about what can we do to support emerging needs and critical needs for COVID-19 with additive manufacturing. So, I mean, from our perspective, we've seen a lot of flexibility. We've seen willingness to actually modify contracts to allow us to change the acceptance terms in cases bases were closed. This is with the Marines, for example.
Right.
All in all, Vago, I'm very impressed with how our customers are approaching this.
Well, right, necessity is the mother of invention. So everybody flexes at times like this to be able to deliver. Let's talk a little bit about the progress payments changes, the equitable adjustment, as well as the declaration of critical infrastructure, and what all of that means in terms of how you run your business, because progress payment rates were changed both for smaller contractors as well as for big contractors, I think from 80 to 85 and then from 85 to 90, if I'm correct, or is it 90 to 95? I'm messing it up. But
I think it's 90 to 95 with actually some of the services said that if need be, they're willing to go even to 100%. So
right.
I think there's a lot of flexibility there.
So walk us through what all of that means functionally for you guys as a prime contractor, and then also try to get into the supplier base, because you guys are I think people have a tendency of forgetting, you know, there's a tendency of seeing the big contractors and not recognizing how dependent the entire industrial base is on actually a much smaller number of much smaller companies that are as integral to delivering that overall big capability. Walk us through what all of these changes mean for you guys and how you're executing your business.
Well, I think, Vago, the fundamental thing, going to the basics, you know, cash is king in every business. And I think a lot of these changes, you know, beyond the fact that you might be able to get more cash a little bit and help with the health of the business, to me, they more are a signal for people to talk about stability long term, because you know each one of us running a business at a time like this, our biggest concern is, you know, the future, not necessarily the long term of the future, but what's going to happen in a few more weeks, what's going to happen in a few more months, what's going to happen if DFAS has to shut down, what's going to happen if there's going to be more disruption associated with the ability to collect cash from customers. And the fact that the DoD, the fact that Andrew Lord and the staff of DoD have made some of those changes, I think serve more to calm people down a little bit from the realization that the government is trying to advance cash payments. The government does understand that long term people have concerns. I mean, I've seen actions by the Navy, by Hondo Gertz, to ask the contracting officer actually to also accelerate putting things on contract, to accelerate settling RAAs, even if they're not settled. So the realization from the government that it's in the best interest of the government and the industry to advance some of those contractual actions, to advance some of those payments, and that will serve to ease more of the fears of what's going to happen in the future. And we have to do the same thing with our supply base. We are working to stay in contact with them. We have had suppliers, especially in California, that when the declaration over there came of shelter in place, they shut down. But what we've seen is in a matter of a few days, they realized that they're part of the defense industrial base, and they reopened, not fully, but reopened at least those production lines that were critical for us, for our night vision business or for the F-35 business. We're staying very, very much in touch with the supply base. I don't think, Vago, that we've seen the end of this, and I am concerned that in the next few weeks, next couple of months, the pressure on the smaller suppliers and the supplier base will intensify, and we'll face some difficulties. I have no doubt in that.
And to clarify, just on progress payments, it was from 80% to 90% for large businesses, and then 90 to 95% for smaller businesses. You just mentioned that longer term outlook, and for a lot of Americans, it's dawning on folks that this is going to be probably deadlier and more prolonged, which is why some people have been sheltered in place for weeks already. And the whole thing has been, we're going to be, the whole thing is to try to minimize the impact of this at the end of the day. You're always very good at looking ahead. What do you see 2 months ahead, 4 months ahead, 6 months ahead, 1 year ahead about how this is going to affect everything? And what are you doing to sort of get ready for that?
I think that there's no doubt that our customers will have to reprioritize. I don't think this is going to impact the overall national defense strategy and push to really address peer competitors. I think that's here to stay in the long term. I think that budgets are going to have to be dedicated to critical infrastructure, IT, and other capabilities. I think that the digital transformation is going to accelerate dramatically. Government has been talking about that. The Air Force has been leading the way around digital transformation. But I think the realization from all of us that this is here to stay, and that's one of the ways in which you can reduce vulnerabilities. I think there is going to be more pressure on getting local capabilities and less dependency on global supply chain, especially in the defense side. We have a significant business with the Department of Homeland Security. We're looking for potential new opportunities there with now different threats. I think the overall protection of critical infrastructure is going to be something that will get a lot of attention, because if you think about the impact of something like this created by nature, you can't even imagine what if a threat like this or similar to that would be created by an adversary. That is something that I think people are starting to talk and think about. We have a business up in Merrimack, New Hampshire, that does about $100 million, leading in the world in diagnostic test equipment. And we believe the overall area of medical diagnostic test equipment, of course, will see a significant boost. We're already working with some of our current customers. So that business, for example, will see probably a significant increase in requirements and new products. So it really depends on the different segments, but I definitely think the consumption of budget towards the stimulus and the economical situation will see some impact in the next couple, 3 years. I have no doubt about that.
Well, and taking it to that point, you guys are Elbit is a very global company. Elbit Systems of America has been very, very important for Elbit. an Israeli company to even be able to access Middle Eastern markets that even a few years ago folks would not have considered to be a possibility. And you're very much a global company, whether it's in Asia or in Europe. How do you see? Do you even have some preliminary market assessment impact on what the budget situation? Because everybody's pretty confident that for 2020 the defense budget's going to be okay. But as you said, when the nation invests $6 trillion, and it could be much, much bigger than that if you look at what the fourth stimulus package will be and the fifth and so on. Right? I mean, Macy's laid off its workforce, and that was 130,000 people. People were surprised last week when it was 3.3 million people filed for unemployment insurance. How do you see defense investment worldwide going in the next couple of years? And how are you mentally preparing for that different dynamic?
Yeah, I think there is going to be stress. We have no doubt there's going to be stress. Look, last year we kind of updated our overall strategy for Elbit Global, and a couple pillars of that strategy was again strengthen significantly our U.S. business, which we've been doing. We made a significant acquisition last year. We've been growing. We've added a lot of organic workforce and capabilities. So that portion, I think, will have to continue, because I think U.S. will take the lead of how we get out of this economic crisis driven by the COVID-19. I think another pillar of that strategy last year was we called it Go West, which really meant focusing more on those customers that, for lack of a better term, have a better balance sheet, just like in a business, countries that have a better balance sheet, that are stronger, that are consuming advanced technology. I think these countries are going to be, it's going to take time. They're going to have some impacts, of course, but they'll come out of this crisis strong, and they'll continue to thrive and invest in defense. Where I think globally the worry is going to be is those countries that don't have a strong balance sheet, that don't have a strong economy and a strong base. And I think some of those countries are going to suffer, and that's going to impact some of the business. But I think we've pivoted more towards the West, the U.S., and those are markets that I think are going to be strong. There's going to be probably an impact for a couple of years, but there's going to be a recovery, and I think I'm optimistic for the future.
Let me ask you, defense contract, there have been some questions about how defense contractors are trying to help more broadly. As you saw, General Motors and a lot of commercial companies are striking these kind of partnerships, whether it's to make ventilators or anything else. What are some of the things you guys are doing? You mentioned Dr. Roper sort of asking folks to do more. What are the kind of things you guys are considering doing that could help?
So I would say several things. So first of all, talk about our medical division. So we have one of the largest OEMs in this country for medical diagnostic equipment is one of our customers. We developed for them a very, very sophisticated robotic, high volume medical diagnostic machine that actually was deployed in a couple places in the world. They just recently have been pushing hard, and I think they received FDA approval to deploy this in the U.S. in clinical settings. They're working very heavily on the COVID-19 test that's going to apply to that machine, and we look to start accelerating production of that equipment, and I think they're going to dedicate the new machines that we're going to be producing to COVID-19 testing. So that's one area that we're awaiting in the next few days, a signal for them to start ramping up on that. We're working with another company that we developed for them a machine in the past that can filter elements of the blood, the lipid layer of the blood, and that has a potential to really produce and be able to mine antibodies from patients who have contracted the virus. And from everything I understand, that's the next stage in treatment for COVID-19 patients. So they're also working with the FDA to try and accelerate approval on that. So that's another one. And beyond that, what we're looking to to do is leverage the infrastructure we have in some of our facilities, Merrimack and others, with clean rooms and other capabilities. We're in discussions with the state government in New Hampshire, but potentially doing things with producing swab kits, test kits. We're looking to where we can support and get engaged. I think that's very, very important for us to do.
Let me ask you one last question. If COVID-19 had not happened, and barring any other catastrophe, you and I would have been interviewing each other next week at the Gaylord outside Washington, D.C. for the annual Sea Air Space Conference and Trade Show, which is the Navy League's premier event every year. Why don't you give us a quick Elbit Systems of America Navy business update that, some of the things you guys would have been highlighting there that unfortunately you didn't have an opportunity, won't have the opportunity to do. I thought it would be a good opportunity to at least ask you about what a little bit of an update on your Navy business.
Absolutely. So, we some of the things we're doing with the Navy, as you know, we're producing laser seekers for the laser JDAM for the SDB-1. So a lot of our smart munitions is where we do a lot of the business with the Navy. I mentioned the upgrade of the FNA-18s. So it's going to go into the Block 3, the advanced cockpit system that we're doing through Boeing with a large area display and a low-profile HUD. A lot of things we're doing for the Marines and with the Navy program offices in Pax River around the V-22 and keeping the V-22 fresh with new capabilities. We are progressing on our night vision business. We're progressing with development of the Gen 4 image intensifier and the digital Gen 4 image intensifier capabilities, which is going to be a breakthrough in night vision capabilities. So we're working through that. We are spending a lot of time these days on loitering munitions, which is the way for the warfighter, for the Navy or the Marine or the Army or SOCOM to project either munitions or other types of effects from a deployed unit 40, 50, 60 clicks away. A lot of new and exciting things that we're working with the Navy and with the other services.
Renan, thanks very much for joining us. I hope you, yours, and your team stay well in these challenging times, and look forward to talking again soon to get updates about how you guys are faring, as you guys are, like so many other companies, are a critical part of the national defense ecosystem. So thanks so much. Stay well, and look forward to talking again soon.
Vago, thank you very much, and thank you for doing this podcast. I think you are playing a key role in keeping us all connected, informed of what's going on. Really appreciate it, and thanks for having me today.
It's a pleasure, and thanks very much also for the support.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. Look out for our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight, bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.